Afternoon sun filtered through Patterson Hardware's ceiling, like honey poured through a sieve painting. Everything in amber tones that made even the industrial shelving look almost beautiful. Marcus Donovan's calloused fingers traced the length of a 2x4 hunting for the telltale ripple that would reveal a hidden warp. 40 years his father had shown him this trick back when the old man's hands were still steady and his lungs hadn't yet discovered what asbestos could do to a body. This board felt true. Marcus wheeled it onto his cart, consulting the list his daughter had printed in her neat block letters that morning. Platform supports, cross beams, decking screws. The treehouse had consumed their weekend since May's first warm days, a project that filled hours otherwise spent avoiding rooms where Sarah's absence still felt like a physical presence. 867 days since the cancer won. Marcus had stopped actively counting somewhere around month 20, but the number remained lodged in his consciousness like a splinter too deep to extract. 2 years, 4 months, 12 days of relearning how to be a complete parent instead of half of a team. Emma materialized at his side, her auburn waves escaping the ponytail he'd attempted during breakfast. She brandished a paint sample the color of a fresh bruise. "This one's called Midnight Violet. What if we did the shutters in this?" And Marcus examined the chip with exaggerated seriousness, though they both understood the cedar planks would reject anything that aggressive. The structure taking shape in their backyard oak was meant to endure decades, maybe shelter Emma's own children someday, when she was grown with a family of her own. But letting her imagine first before practicality intervened with its gentle corrections, that was part of the process. "We should test it at home under real light. These fluorescents make everything look different than it actually is." Emma pivoted toward the paint department with the boundless energy that defined 8-year-olds, her sneakers squeaking against polished concrete. Marcus returned to his measurements pencil lodged behind his ear, where it lived so permanently that removing it felt wrong, like missing a wedding ring. The phoenix tattoo on his left wrist caught afternoon light through the high windows. The ink had faded to blue-gray over the years, becoming something between a memory and a scar. Marcus tugged his sleeve lower instinctively, the gesture so automatic he barely registered doing it anymore. Not since Emma started asking questions in first grade that required explanations involving adult decisions and permanent mistakes. Victoria had sketched the design on a coffee shop napkin back when Marcus was 26, and convinced that matching tattoos represented something eternal. Her concept naturally. She'd specialized in beautiful ideas that reality had no use for, each one delivered with such passionate conviction that disagreeing felt like blasphemy. Two phoenixes learning to fly together, wings spread despite the breaks. They'd gotten inked the same afternoon, her shoulder blade and his wrist, the artist muttering warnings about couple tattoos being cursed, but accepting their cash because some lessons only stick when learned through lived experience. Victoria had vanished into New York 3 weeks after the ink-healed gallery position, and promises evaporating like morning fog. Her texts grew sparse within days. Calls went unanswered. By week 3, she'd blocked every contact method, erasing him so thoroughly that Marcus spent months wondering if he'd hallucinated their entire relationship during some extended fever dream. He'd grieved the way men do silently while fixing things that didn't require fixing. Buried himself in the workshop building furniture no one commissioned and refinishing pieces that were perfectly fine. Gained weight from beer and takeout before his father's intervention, the kind that carried enough love to make brutal honesty land properly. 6 months later, Sarah appeared at a woodworking exhibition, spending hours asking penetrating questions about joinery techniques and construction methods. She'd been stable where Victoria was cyclone present, where Victoria was perpetually halfway gone, even when physically beside him. Sarah understood love as daily choice, rather than consuming feeling that burned bright until boredom extinguished it. They'd constructed something genuine, marriage daughter, 6 years of contentment, that didn't require drama as proof of existence. Sarah had known about Victoria the tattoo made secrets impossible. She'd traced the phoenix once, asking if he still carried thoughts of his ex. Sometimes Marcus had admitted because their foundation was honesty. But thinking about someone versus wanting them back are separate things entirely. Sarah had kissed his wrist directly over the ink, expressing hope that Victoria had located whatever she'd been chasing. That was Sarah's nature, generous even toward the woman who'd shattered him before she got the opportunity to rebuild him properly. Sarah's final months retained edges sharp enough to draw blood years later. Her refusal of bitterness even as her body staged its rebellion. The promises she'd extracted about continuing life after her death, about not becoming one of those ghosts who haunt their own houses because they've forgotten how to be alive. He'd honored those promises mostly. Rose each morning fed Emma, operated the shop, built things because that's what Donovan men did across 3 generations. They transformed raw materials into objects that outlasted their creators. Marcus marked his board with a carpenter's pencil, the line emerging straight from muscle memory. Hardware store aromatics enveloped him, fresh lumber, motor oil, the metallic bite of new tools awaiting purpose. Safe territory, predictable. A universe where measurements mattered and effort produced tangible results. A child's voice sliced through ambient shopping cart rattles and overhead announcements, clear and curious with that quality that raises neck hair and signals imminent change. "Excuse me, sir. My mother has a tattoo, just like yours." Reality contracted to a pinpoint. Marcus's pencil escaped his fingers, clattering against concrete, with the sound of punctuation ending an unwritten sentence. The box of deck screws followed, detonating on impact ball bearings, scattering in every direction, like his thoughts attempting to organize themselves. He pivoted slowly, moving with the caution of someone uncertain they want to witness what's waiting. Some ancient instinct was already screaming that nothing would remain unchanged after this moment. A girl stood 3 feet distant, perhaps 9 years old, wearing a navy dress with white Peter Pan collar that announced private academy and trust funds. Patent leather shoes reflected fluorescent light, polished to the shine, suggesting someone else dressed her mornings. A velvet headband restrained dark curls that escaped in artfully arranged chaos, the styled imperfection that costs real money. But her eyes mirrored the ones Marcus encountered in bathroom mirrors during morning shaving routines. Not the color hers ran brown while his tended hazel, but the underlying architecture. The slight upward tilt at outer corners. The directness of her gaze, having already assessed him as safe enough to approach and now awaiting confirmation of her judgment. She indicated his wrist where his sleeve had ridden up during his turn. Her finger was precise and small, aimed at the phoenix that had become so integrated into his body that he sometimes forgot its presence until someone else noticed. "My mother has the same one on her shoulder. She never shows anyone, but I saw it once when she was changing. She told me it was from a long time ago, from someone important." Marcus's brain scrambled, processing the impossible equation being presented. The tattoo didn't originate from any pattern book. It was original, created by 2 people who'd believed they were constructing something permanent on disposable napkin. Only 2 versions existed worldwide, his and Victoria's, because they'd paid extra, ensuring the artist wouldn't recreate it for subsequent clients. The girl tilted her head, awaiting a response he couldn't formulate. She possessed careful posture someone had taught her: shoulders back, chin level, the presentation that mattered in rooms where people measured your worth before you spoke. But beneath the polish, something vulnerable leaked through. The universal expression of childhood loneliness that transcends tax brackets and trust funds in patent leather shoes. Emma appeared at his elbow, curiosity overriding stranger danger lessons they'd practiced. Her voice emerged bright and welcoming, the way Sarah had modeled approaching everyone, until they demonstrated reasons not to be. "Hi, I'm Emma. That's a really pretty dress. Do you go to St. Catherine's?" The girl's attention shifted, her formal composure fracturing slightly under Emma's unguarded warmth. "I'm Lily. I go to Riverside Academy. We don't have recess anymore. They call it structured outdoor time." Emma's nose wrinkled in her expression, reserved for adults saying technically accurate things that fundamentally missed the point. "That sounds boring. We have actual recess with swings and everything." Someone dropped a paint can 3 aisles over. The metallic clatter was abrupt and sharp in the Commerce Cathedral, loud enough to startle both girls. Marcus felt time decelerate in that particular way, preceding fundamental change, like the interval between lightning and thunder, when you know the strike is coming but haven't felt it yet. Footsteps approached, rapid and urgent. Expensive heels clicked unmistakable rhythm against linoleum, sharp and precise, the sound of someone who'd mastered moving purposefully through rooms full of people who measured worth in bank statement zeros. "Lily, where did you—" The voice severed mid-sentence. Marcus knew it before turning, before seeing her face, before his brain finished processing what his ears had already confirmed. Some sounds excavate themselves into your bones and wait dormant until circumstance resurrects them. He'd spent a decade bearing this particular frequency, and now it rose from the grave intact, dragging every memory he'd thought safely killed. He turned slowly, each degree of rotation an exercise in controlled demolition. His hands were trembling. His chest felt constricted, like someone had wrapped cables around his ribs and was pulling them tighter with each breath. 10 years had refined Victoria's sharp edges into something approaching dangerous. The ratty art student with paint-crusted fingers had evolved into a woman wearing a charcoal suit that probably exceeded his truck's last service cost. Her dark hair, once long enough to tangle in his fingers during nights that felt infinite, while living them, was cut in a severe bob, framing cheekbones he'd traced with reverent hands in a different lifetime. But her eyes hadn't changed. Still that particular gray shade reminiscent of October skies before rain, the weather that made you want to stay inside with someone warm. Right now, those eyes were wide, with something between recognition and terror, trapped in the moment where past and present collided with the force of inevitability. Marcus. His name left her lips like a confession, like a curse, like the final word of a prayer she'd been reciting for a decade without knowing how it ended. Victoria. Tasting her name after 10 years of not speaking, it felt like touching a scar that had never properly healed. The air between them turned thick and difficult to breathe, charged with everything they'd done to each other in the name of love and self-preservation. Emma pressed closer to his side, confused by tension she could sense but not name. Lily looked between them, her small face creased with the worry children get when sensing adult complications beyond their comprehension. Victoria recovered first features, smoothing into a mask of polite distance that probably served her well in boardrooms and charity functions. Her voice emerged controlled, professional, like she was declining a business proposal, rather than confronting the person she'd erased from her life without explanation. I apologize. Lily, we need to leave now. But Lily was studying the tattoo again, then her mother, then back to Marcus, with the dawning wonder of a child piecing together a puzzle adults thought they'd hidden. Her voice came out small but determined, the tone of someone who'd been told no enough at times to recognize when the answer was actually yes. Is he the one from your story? The one about the phoenix who found another phoenix and they learned to fly together before the storm came? Victoria's face went pale beneath her expensive foundation. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a structural failure he couldn't name. Hardware store sounds faded to white noise, everything narrowing to this moment, this question, this child who somehow knew things she shouldn't be able to know. What story? But Victoria was already taking Lily's hand, already pivoting toward the exit with the desperate grace of someone fleeing a crime scene. Her words came out rushed and broken, nothing like the controlled professional who'd spoken 10 seconds earlier. I'm sorry. We have to go. I'm sorry. She moved toward the door, pulling Lily along, but the girl looked back over her shoulder. Marcus saw it clearly now in afternoon light, streaming through high windows. The shape of her nose was his. The way her eyebrows arched when curious, the stubborn set of her jaw that he recognized from every mirror he'd ever faced, from every photo of his father and grandfather that lined the workshop walls. Emma's voice was small beside him, confused and worried in equal measure. Dad, who was that lady? Why did she run away? Marcus couldn't answer. He was too busy calculating, months counting backward, remembering the last night he had spent with Victoria before she disappeared. The hotel room neither could really afford rain against windows. Promises they'd made about calling and making distance work, about love being enough when you wanted it to be. 9 months. Lily was 9 years old. The math was simple and devastating and impossible to ignore. Now that he'd seen her face, heard her voice, watched her look at him with his own eyes set in features that were half Victoria and half him. The automatic door slid open. Victoria and Lily disappeared into the parking lot, into a Mercedes that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 years. He watched them drive away, his daughter frozen in hardware store wreckage, his other daughter asking questions he couldn't answer because his throat was too tight, and his brain was still trying to process an equation that changed everything about the last 10 years of his life. Emma tugged at his sleeve, her voice rising with the fear children get when their parents stop functioning properly. Dad, are you okay? Marcus forced himself to breathe, to focus, to be present for the daughter who was here and not the one who'd just driven away in a German luxury vehicle. He knelt down so they were eye level, taking Emma's small hands in his larger ones. I'm okay, kiddo. Just saw someone I used to know. Someone I haven't seen in a very long time. The lie tasted like copper on his tongue, but he couldn't explain the truth when he didn't fully understand it himself yet. Emma studied his face with Sarah's perceptive eyes, seeing more than he wanted her to see, but young enough to accept the incomplete explanation. Can we still get the paint? Marcus almost laughed at the question at the way children could hold space for both the mundane and the monumental without seeing any contradiction. He stood up, his knees cracking in the way they'd started doing after 40, and nodded. Yeah, let's get the paint. They finished shopping in a daze, Marcus going through motions while his mind spun in circles. Every checkout line felt interminable. Every interaction with employees felt like it was happening underwater. He loaded lumber into his truck bed, helped Emma into her booster seat, drove home through streets that looked identical, but felt different, like he'd stepped sideways into an alternate timeline, where nothing was quite what he'd thought it was. The workshop behind his house had been his sanctuary since Sarah died, the place where problems had solutions and effort produced results. Tonight it felt like a cage. He went through motions of unloading supplies, organizing materials, while Emma did homework at the workbench and chattered about her day. Marcus heard approximately every third word. His mind kept replaying the hardware store scene, examining it from every angle. Lily's face, the tattoo, Victoria's terror when Lily mentioned the story. The way the girl had looked at him with recognition that went deeper than a stranger's curiosity. After Emma went to bed, Marcus sat in the workshop with his phone in his hand, staring at Victoria's name in his contacts. He'd never deleted it, even after she'd blocked him, even after meeting Sarah, even after building a whole life that had nothing to do with the girl who'd vanished into New York with his heart and apparently his child. His finger hovered over the call button for 10 minutes before he set the phone down. What was he supposed to say? Did you have my daughter and forget to mention it? Were you pregnant when you left? Why did you run away today like you were being chased by something more than just an uncomfortable coincidence? Sleep didn't come that night. Marcus lay in bed watching the ceiling fan rotate, counting blades, because it was easier than counting the questions piling up in his mind. Sarah's pillow still smelled faintly like her shampoo, a ghost of lavender that was probably his imagination, but felt real enough to hurt. If Lily was his daughter and everything in him knew she was, despite the lack of confirmation, why had Victoria kept it secret? Why disappear completely instead of telling him? He'd loved her once, loved her with the kind of intensity that feels like drowning and flying at the same time. When she'd left for that gallery position, he'd offered to follow, to pack up everything and start over in New York, because that's what you did when you love someone. She'd said no, said his life was here, his family's business was here, his roots ran 3 generations deep, and she couldn't ask him to abandon all of that. 3 weeks later, the silence complete and absolute, like she'd been erased from existence. He'd grieved. He'd moved on. He'd met Sarah and built something real, something that lasted until cancer decided 6 years was enough. Now this. Dawn arrived too soon and not soon enough. Marcus made Emma breakfast, packed her lunch, dropped her at school with the same routine they'd maintained for 2 years. Everything was normal on the surface, but underneath he was calculating, planning, trying to figure out how to find answers without causing more damage. The shop needed him. Dave, his 60-year-old assistant who'd worked with Marcus's father before him, gave him a look when he walked in 20 minutes late. You look like hell. Feel about the same. Woman trouble. Marcus almost laughed at how inadequate that description was for what he was dealing with. Dave had been around long enough to remember Victoria had been there during the aftermath, when Marcus had spent 6 months being useless and angry. Something like that. They worked in silence for a while, Marcus focusing on a custom cabinet order for the Henderson renovation. The measurements kept coming out wrong, his hands shaking enough that the pencil lines weren't straight. After the 3rd attempt, Dave set down his router and crossed his arms. You gonna tell me what's eating you, or are we going to keep wasting good walnut until you get your head straight? Marcus stared at the board he'd just cut a 1/4 inch short. In 15 years of professional woodworking, he'd never made such a careless mistake. Dave's expression said he'd noticed and was waiting for an explanation that made sense. Ran into someone yesterday, someone I haven't seen in 10 years. The ex-Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice yet. She still looked good. It wasn't about how Victoria looked, though she did look good in the way people who can afford personal trainers and expensive skincare look good. It was about Lily, about the girl with his eyes and Victoria's hair, and a story about phoenixes that she shouldn't know. She had a kid with her, 9 years old. Dave was quiet for a moment, doing the same math Marcus had been doing since yesterday afternoon. His face showed the moment he understood the exact instant the implication landed. Yours, maybe. Probably. I don't know for sure, but she had my face, Dave. Not kind of looked like me. Had my actual face, just female and younger. Dave whistled low, the sound expressing what words couldn't. He'd been married 40 years, had 5 kids of his own, understood the weight of what Marcus was saying. What are you going to do? Marcus set down the measuring tape he'd been holding like a lifeline. I have no idea. The problem was the not knowing. If Lily was his daughter and every cell in his body screamed that she was why, had Victoria kept it secret? She could have told him before leaving, could have called or written or sent a message through mutual friends. Instead, she'd vanished so completely that Marcus had spent months wondering if something terrible had happened to her, if she would dead in a ditch somewhere, and he'd never know. He'd even called hospitals at one point, checked police reports before accepting that she'd simply chosen to erase him from her life without explanation. That kind of abandonment left marks that didn't heal properly, scars that pulled tight when the weather changed. Monday dragged into Tuesday. Marcus went through motions, filled orders, picked up Emma from school, made dinner they both barely touched. Emma kept asking what was wrong, her 8-year-old intuition picking up on tension he couldn't quite hide. Nothing, kiddo, just tired. The lie sat heavy between them, but how was he supposed to explain something he didn't understand himself? How do you tell your daughter that she might have a sister, that her father might have another child he'd never known about, that the past was suddenly present and nothing made sense anymore? Wednesday morning brought rain, the kind of steady downpour that turns everything gray and makes people drive 10 miles under the speed limit. Marcus stood at the workshop window watching it fall, coffee going cold in his hands, when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Victoria. His heart kicked against his ribs. She'd unblocked him or gotten a new number or finally decided running wasn't going to work anymore. He stared at the message for a full minute before his fingers could remember how to type. When the response came immediately, like she'd been waiting with her finger over the send button. Tonight, after Lily's asleep. I'll send you an address. The address arrived 5 minutes later, coordinates to a neighborhood Marcus had only ever driven through on his way to somewhere else. Old money territory where houses hid behind stone walls and ancient trees, where wealth was so established it didn't need to announce itself. He texted back a single word. Okay, the day crawled past. Marcus rebuilt the same cabinet joint 3 times before Dave physically took the tools out of his hands and told him to go home before he hurt himself or someone else. Emma had a play date after school, giving him a few hours to sit in the empty house and try to prepare for a conversation he had no idea how to have. At 7, he showered and changed into clean clothes, suddenly aware that he probably smelled like sawdust and wood stain. Not that it mattered. This wasn't about impressing Victoria. This was about getting answers to questions that had been building for 36 hours straight. The drive took 20 minutes through rain that had softened to mist. The gate opened at his approach, clearly expecting him, and Marcus followed a winding driveway through manicured gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. Past fountains and sculptures that belonged in museums, past hedges shaped into geometry that nature would never create on its own. The house itself was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, all clean lines and soaring spaces that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. This wasn't just art gallery curator money. This was something else entirely: inheritance and trust funds, and the kind of wealth that came with responsibilities and complications Marcus couldn't begin to imagine. Victoria answered the door herself, barefoot in jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that made Marcus's chest ache with sense memory. She looked younger like this, closer to the girl he'd known, the one who'd laugh until she couldn't breathe and paint until dawn, and talk about changing the world through art like it was something actually possible. Come in. She stepped aside to let him enter a foyer that was more gallery than home. Soaring ceilings, carefully curated paintings, sculptures that probably cost more than his house. Everything tasteful, expensive, perfect, and somehow completely soulless. Lily's asleep. Her room's on the 3rd floor. She won't hear us. Victoria led him through the house to a study lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, poured them both whiskey from a crystal decanter, without asking if he wanted it, and handed him a glass with shaking hands. They stood like that for a moment, not quite facing each other, while the weight of 10 years pressed down on the space between them. Outside, the rain had stopped, but water still dripped from gutters and eaves, a steady percussion that filled the silence. Victoria spoke first, her voice flat with the careful control of someone who'd rehearsed this speech in mirrors and empty rooms until it sounded almost natural. Her name is Lily Ashford. She's 9 years old. She was born on March 14th at Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. She likes art and mathematics, plays violin at a pre-conservatory level, speaks 3 languages, and has never had a birthday party with more than 2 other children present. She paused, took a long drink of whiskey, and continued. She's also never met her father, has no idea who he is, and I've spent 9 years making sure it stays that way. The words were meant to hurt, and they did. Marcus pushed past the pain to the only question that mattered. Is she mine? Victoria finally turned to face him. The raw anguish in her expression made him take an involuntary step forward. Yes. The confirmation hit him like a physical blow, even though he'd known, even though the math was simple and the resemblance was undeniable. Hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way observation couldn't. Why didn't you tell me? Because telling you would have destroyed everything you had. Because I left to give you a chance at a real life, not the half existence I could offer you. She set down her glass and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small in the oversized sweater, despite being 5'7" and perfectly capable of running a foundation. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after I left. I was in New York starting the gallery job, and I took a test in a convenience store bathroom at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep and kept throwing up and couldn't keep pretending it was stress. Her voice cracked. She paused to collect herself, visibly struggling to maintain the composure that was probably second nature in her professional life. I sat on that dirty floor with the plastic stick in my hand, and I thought about calling you. God, Marcus, I thought about it for days. I had my phone out 100 times. But then I did what I always do. I researched. I looked you up online, checked your social media, and that's when I saw it. She met his eyes, and hers were swimming with unshed tears that caught the lamplight. You were engaged to Sarah. You'd posted photos from a dinner where you proposed. You looked so happy, Marcus. So fundamentally at peace in a way you never looked with me. Marcus felt like the floor had dropped away. His hands tightened around the whiskey glass hard enough that he was surprised it didn't shatter. You were pregnant with my child, and you didn't tell me because I'd moved on. The anger in his voice was sharp, but underneath it was something much more complicated: grief for the choice Victoria had made, and the years he'd lost, and the daughter who'd grown up without him because someone else had decided that was best. Victoria laughed, but it was bitter and broken. Not just moved on, you'd found what you needed. Sarah was gone. Even in those photos, I could see she was steady present, everything I wasn't. I was chaos, Marcus. I was ambition and restlessness, and always looking at the horizon instead of what was right in front of me. I would have pulled you away from your family, your business, everything that grounded you. And for what a relationship that was already falling apart before I left. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to hold back tears through sheer force of will. I loved you enough to let you be happy, even if it meant raising our daughter alone. The silence that followed was heavy with all the different futures that had died that day in a New York bathroom. Marcus's voice, when he finally found it, was rough, scraped raw by emotions he couldn't fully name. You didn't just decide for yourself, Victoria. You decided for me, for Lily. You took away my choice. She nodded slowly, tears finally spilling over despite her efforts. I know, and I've lived with that guilt every single day. But Marcus, you need to understand. I didn't just disappear. I came from money, old money that my family had been managing for generations. When my father died 6 months after Lily was born, I inherited the Ashford Foundation. Millions of dollars property investments, all of it tied up in trusts and legal structures that would have made co-parenting a nightmare. She turned to face him fully now, and he saw the exhaustion carved into her features, the weight of 9 years of secrets and lies and managing an empire while raising a child alone. I wasn't just some art student who got lucky with a gallery job. I was a trust fund kid trying to build something on my own before the money swallowed me. And when it did, when I became Lily's only parent and sole heir to everything my family had built, I made a choice. I built walls. I kept her safe. I kept her private. And I told myself that giving you up was the price of that safety. Marcus sat down in one of the expensive leather chairs, his hands trembling too badly to hold the glass anymore. He set it on a side table that probably cost more than his truck. Did Sarah know? Victoria shook her head. How would she? I made sure every trace of my pregnancy disappeared. Used my mother's maiden name at the hospital. Had the birth registered under a different surname initially. Changed it legally when Lily was 6 months old. I was thorough, Marcus. Ruthlessly thorough. She paused, then added softly, I'm sorry about Sarah. I read about it online. I thought about reaching out then, but what? You thought I'd had enough suffering. Didn't need to know I had another daughter. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. He saw Victoria flinch, saw her retreat into the professional mask that kept everyone at a safe distance. I thought you deserved to grieve in peace. I thought adding this truth would only multiply the pain. That wasn't your call to make. But his anger was fading now, replaced by something more complex. Grief for all the moments he'd missed, mixed with understanding he didn't want to feel. He thought about those years with Sarah, how complete they'd seemed, how Emma's arrival had felt like the perfect fulfillment of their family. If Victoria had told him about Lily, then what would he have done? Left his pregnant wife, split his time between two families. The scenarios played out in his head, and none of them ended well. Maybe Victoria had been right. Maybe her silence had been a strange kind of gift, allowing him to love Sarah and Emma without the complication of divided loyalties. But now Sarah was gone, and the secret had found its way to light anyway, and Marcus couldn't decide if this was fate or just terrible timing. Why didn't you tell me when Sarah died? You had 2 years. 2 years where telling me wouldn't have destroyed an existing family. Victoria's face crumpled, the professional mask shattering completely. Because by then I was terrified. Terrified you'd hate me. Terrified you'd take Lily away. Terrified she'd hate me for keeping you from her. I'd built this entire life on the story that her father was a brief relationship that didn't work out, that he didn't know about her and was happier that way. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face unchecked. I told her he was a good man who loved building things, who had kind hands, and would have loved her if he'd known she existed, but that sometimes adults make choices they can't undo. Her voice broke completely. I told her about the tattoos, showed her mine, told her somewhere in the world was a person with the matching one who carried a piece of her in his heart, even though he didn't know it. It was the only truth I could give her. Marcus moved without thinking, crossing the space between them and pulling her into his arms. She collapsed against him, 10 years of held tears finally breaking free. He held her while she shook with the force of them, and he was crying 2 silent tears for everything they'd lost and everything they'd done to each other in the name of love and protection and fear. They stood like that for a long time, 2 people who tried to protect each other in the worst possible ways. While upstairs a child slept who was proof that some secrets are too big to stay buried forever, that the past eventually catches up no matter how fast or far you run. When Victoria finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, and she looked more real than she had in 10 years. More like the girl he'd known and less like the polished executive who'd answered the door. What do we do now? Marcus wiped his own face with the back of his hand, taking a shaky breath that didn't quite fill his lungs. Now you tell me everything. Every birthday I missed, every milestone, every word she said, and steps she took. You tell me about her, really tell me. And then we figure out how to be honest with her together. Victoria nodded slowly, relief and terror warring on her face. She asks about you, about her father. She has this fantasy that you're out there somewhere, that someday you'll find each other and it'll be like a fairy tale. I've tried to prepare her for disappointment, but she's so hopeful, Marcus. She's got your stubbornness and my dreaming, and it's this heartbreaking combination of wanting the impossible and believing she can make it happen through sheer force of will. Marcus felt something fierce and protective surge through him. This was his daughter, a person who'd existed for 9 years without him, but who'd been hoping for him anyway, building a father in her imagination from scraps of stories and a matching tattoo she glimpsed on her mother's shoulder. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. So she did. They settled onto the floor, that expensive study, backs against a leather couch that probably cost more than Marcus's truck, and Victoria told him about the daughter he'd never known. Lily was born 3 weeks early during a thunderstorm that knocked out power in half of Manhattan. Victoria had labored alone except for a nurse who held her hand through contractions, no family present because she'd told them she was traveling for work. The baby came out screaming with her fists raised, like she was ready to fight the world, 6 pounds, 4 ounces of fury and determination. The first 3 months were hell. Lily had colic that no amount of rocking or formula adjustments could touch. She'd scream for hours, inconsolable, until Victoria learned that humming just the constant vibration of sound would calm her enough to sleep. So Victoria hummed until her throat was raw, until the building superintendent complained about the noise at 3 in the morning until she could barely speak above a whisper during the day. Lily's first word was more because she was always hungry for everything. More food, more books, more music, more life crammed into each waking moment. At 3, she conducted an invisible orchestra with a wooden spoon so serious about it that Victoria found her a real violin teacher. The woman declared the child had perfect pitch and refused payment for the first year of lessons, insisting it was an honor to teach someone with such natural talent. At 5, Lily was reading chapter books and asking questions about death and infinity that Victoria had no idea how to answer. Where do we go when we die? What's at the edge of the universe? If time is infinite, does that mean everything that can happen will happen? Victoria showed Marcus photos on her phone, baby pictures she'd never posted anywhere, kept locked in encrypted folders. Lily at 6 months with a gummy smile, and Victoria's dark hair already thick. Lily at 2 covered in finger paint and delighted by the mess. Lily at 4 standing on a box to reach her violin bow, held with the concentration of a surgeon performing delicate surgery. At 7, she started asking why she didn't have a dad like other kids at school. I told her the truth as gently as I could, that her father was a good man who didn't know she existed, that circumstances had kept us apart, that it wasn't about her being unwanted. Marcus's voice came out strangled. What did she say? Victoria's hands trembled as she scrolled through more photos. She asked if she could meet you someday. I told her maybe when she was older. She accepted that, but then the nightmares started. Dreams about being forgotten, about searching for someone who didn't exist. She'd wake up crying for a father she'd never met, and I'd hold her and feel the weight of every lie I'd ever told crushing my chest. The loneliness was what broke Victoria's heart most. Despite the money for private schools and tutors and every opportunity, Lily was isolated. The other wealthy kids sensed she was different, a foundation heiress being raised by a single mother in a world where lineage and traditional families still mattered. Their parents whispered at pickup speculation about the Ashford heir's mysterious origins. Lily learned early to build walls around herself, let very few people entrust even fewer. Marcus listened to 9 years compressed into hours, his daughter's entire childhood delivered in fragments and photos and Victoria's guilt-soaked memories. By the time she finished, it was past midnight, and he felt like he'd lived a parallel life he'd been robbed of experiencing in real time. I want to tell her, not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. She deserves to know. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, fear and resignation playing across her features. Emma deserves to know too. They already love each other, Marcus. I could see it today in that hardware store. Maybe they knew before we did. Marcus thought about Emma's immediate friendliness, the way she'd introduced herself without hesitation. About how right it had felt, watching them talk like puzzle pieces, sliding into place before anyone realized there was a puzzle to solve. They're sisters. However we got here, whatever we did wrong, they're sisters and they should get to be sisters. Victoria nodded, something loosening in her shoulders, like she'd been holding her breath for 9 years and could finally exhale. How do we do this? Carefully, honestly, together. The word felt strange in his mouth, together applied to him and Victoria after a decade of determined separation. But they were bound now by something stronger than old romance or ancient hurt. They were bound by Lily, by Emma, by the recognition that 2 children deserved better than the mess their parents had made. Victoria walked him to the door an hour later, both of them exhausted and wrung out from crying and confessing and trying to figure out how to fix something that had been broken for almost a decade. She caught his arm before he could leave. Thank you for not hating me. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the hardware store. Under the polish and the expensive clothes and the foundation executive persona, she was still the girl who'd sketched phoenixes on napkins and believed in second chances. I did hate you for a long time after you left, but hate takes too much energy, and I had a daughter to raise and a life to build. Eventually, it just became something that happened once, like a car accident you survived. He paused, then added, I don't know what this is yet, what we're doing, or how it ends. But for Lily, for Emma, we figure it out. Victoria nodded, tears threatening again. For them. Marcus drove home through empty streets, his mind spinning with everything Victoria had told him. Lily's first steps, her first word, her first violin recital. All the moments he'd missed, all the years he could never get back. But also the possibility of everything that came next of being a father to both his daughters instead of just one. Emma was asleep when he got home, curled up in bed with the stuffed elephant Sarah had bought her 3 Christmases ago. Marcus stood in her doorway watching her breathe, feeling the weight of what he was about to tell her, the bomb he was about to drop into the middle of her carefully reconstructed life. She'd lost her mother 2 years ago. Now he was going to tell her she had a sister she'd never known about, that her father had a whole other child with another woman, that the family she thought was complete had been incomplete all along. He wanted to protect her from this, but there was no protection available. The truth was coming whether they were ready or not, and all he could do was try to make sure it didn't break her in the process. Marcus spent the rest of the night in his workshop, unable to sleep, unable to sit still. He pulled out a piece of cherry wood he'd been saving and started carving without a plan, letting his hands work, while his mind tried to process everything. The shape that emerged was a small phoenix wing spread rising from stylized flames. He'd made hundreds of projects in this workshop, but this one felt different. This one felt like the beginning of something he couldn't see the end of yet, like the first page of a story that would take years to finish. By the time dawn broke, he had 2 phoenixes carved, one for Emma, one for Lily. Sisters who didn't know they were sisters, yet connected by blood and circumstance, and a father who was just now learning how to be a father to both of them. Morning light streamed through the workshop windows, catching dust motes that danced like the ones in the hardware store where everything had changed. Marcus set the carvings on his workbench, these small physical proofs that broken things could be made whole through patience and care. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Thank you for listening, for not giving up on her. He typed back, she's my daughter. I don't know how to give up on that. Outside, a cardinal sang from the oak tree where the treehouse waited, half finished, a project he'd started before knowing he had another daughter who needed a place to feel safe. He'd have to make it bigger, now make room for 2 girls instead of one, make sure there was space for everyone who needed to belong somewhere. Marcus looked at the phoenixes on his workbench, at the promise they represented, and felt something shift in his chest. The past 10 years had been about surviving loss, about keeping his head above water, and making sure Emma was okay. The next years would be about something different, about building a family from the wreckage of old mistakes and new truths, about learning how to love 2 daughters instead of one. He didn't know if he was ready for it. But ready or not, the storm had arrived, and all he could do was weather it and hope they all came through intact on the other side. The sun climbed higher, painting the workshop gold. Marcus picked up one of the carved phoenixes, feeling the smooth wood under his fingers. This was just the beginning. The hard part, telling the girls, navigating Victoria's family complications, figuring out how to be a father to a daughter who'd existed for 9 years without him, all of that was still coming. But for now, in this moment, with morning light streaming through the windows and sawdust floating in the air, like suspended possibility, Marcus allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Terrifying, uncertain hope that maybe, just maybe, they could all find their way through this together. The hardware store had been the lightning strike. Everything that came next would be the thunder, the aftermath, the reckoning. Marcus set the phoenix down and headed inside to wake Emma for school, to start another day of the life that had just fundamentally changed without her knowing it yet. Soon he'd tell her. Soon they'd face this together. But for now, he'd give her one more morning of the world as she understood it before everything shifted, and the family of 2 became a family of 4, whether they were ready or not. The following Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt like mockery. Brilliant sunshine, temperatures warm enough for short sleeves, leaves just beginning their transformation into fire colors. Marcus stood in his driveway at noon watching Victoria's Mercedes pull up with the same tightness in his chest he had carried for 5 days straight. They'd texted constantly since Wednesday night. Careful planning logistics, trying to script something that couldn't be scripted. How do you tell 2 children that their worlds are about to fundamentally shift? That the family structures they'd understood their entire lives were incomplete? that secrets had been living in the spaces between what they knew and what was real. Victoria emerged from the car, first dressed down in jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger, more like the girl Marcus remembered. Lily climbed out of the back seat, confusion evident on her face. "Why are we here?" Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she smoothed Lily's dress. "Because Emma's dad, Marcus, invited us over." "Remember him from the hardware store?" Lily's face lit up with recognition that made Marcus's throat tight. "The man with the matching tattoo." "Yes, sweetheart. Him." Emma appeared on the porch, drawn by the sound of car doors. Marcus watched his daughters see each other, watched something pass between them that adults couldn't name but children recognized instinctively. Emma's smile was genuine, uncomplicated, by the knowledge that was about to detonate in the center of her life. "Hi, Lily, do you want to see the treehouse? We've been working on it forever." Lily looked to Victoria, who nodded. The girls disappeared around the side of the house, their voices fading into the backyard, leaving the adults standing in charged silence. "How do we do this?" Marcus's question hung in the air between them. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself despite the warmth. "Honestly, simply, we tell them the truth and then we deal with whatever comes after." They followed the sound of the girls' voices to the backyard where Emma was already explaining the treehouse construction with the enthusiasm of someone who'd invested months of Saturdays into its creation. Lily listened with the intense focus she apparently brought to everything, asking questions about weight distribution and structural integrity that made Emma laugh. "You sound like my dad. He's always talking about that stuff." Marcus and Victoria exchanged glances. Now or never. Marcus cleared his throat and both girls turned their faces open and curious. "Girls, we need to talk about something important. Why don't you both sit down?" The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Children had radar for serious adult conversations. Emma's smile faded. Lily's shoulders drew up in that defensive posture Victoria had described, the one she adopted when she sensed something was wrong. They sat on the grass side by side without planning it, and Marcus felt his heart crack a little at how right they looked together. He knelt down so he was at their level, Victoria beside him, and for a moment no one spoke. "How did you start a conversation that would change everything, Emma? You know how you've said sometimes you wish you had a sister?" Emma nodded slowly, her green eyes suddenly wary. "You do. You have a sister. Lily is your sister." The words landed like stones and still, water ripples spreading outward. Emma looked at Lily, then at Marcus, then at Victoria, her 8-year-old brain working through implications that would take adults weeks to process. "I don't understand. How can Lily be my sister? She has a different mom." Marcus had rehearsed this part 100 times in his head, but nothing prepared him for the reality of explaining adult mistakes to a child who trusted him to always tell the truth. "A long time ago, before you were born, before I met your mom, I knew Victoria. We were close. And then she moved away and we lost touch." Lily was staring at him now, something dawning in her expression that was equal parts hope and terror. Victoria took over, her voice shaking. "Honey, do you remember the stories I told you about your father? About the kind man who liked building things?" Lily nodded, not breathing. "He's Marcus, Emma's dad. He's your father too." The silence that followed was absolute. Emma's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like betrayal. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move, frozen between wanting and believing. "You're my dad." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, his own vision blurring. "Yes, I am. I didn't know about you before this week. I just found out when I saw you at the hardware store. But yes, I'm your father." Lily launched herself at him with the force of 9 years of waiting. She hit his chest hard enough to knock him back, her small body shaking with sobs as she clung to him like he might disappear if she loosened her grip. "I knew it. I knew when I saw the tattoo. Mother, I knew." Marcus caught her, held her, felt his daughter crying against his shirt, while his own tears fell into her dark hair. This was his child, the reality becoming visceral in the weight of her, the sound of her voice breaking on the word dad. But Emma hadn't moved. She sat frozen on the grass, face working through emotions too complex for an 8-year-old to name. Victoria started to reach for her, but Emma pulled back, eyes fixed on Marcus with something that looked like betrayal. "You lied. You all lied." Her voice cracked on the accusation. Lily went still in Marcus's arms, suddenly aware that joy for her meant pain for someone else. Sweetheart, it's complicated. Adults made mistakes and we were trying to... Emma cut Victoria off, still looking at Marcus. How long did you know about her? Marcus felt his throat close. He'd known this question was coming, had practiced answers that suddenly felt like more lies. A few weeks. Emma's face crumpled. Weeks. You knew for weeks and then didn't tell me. She was off the grass and running before anyone could stop her. Footsteps pounding up the porch stairs, doors slamming with finality. Marcus moved to follow, but Victoria caught his arm. Let me. She headed inside while Marcus stood in his backyard with Lily still clinging to him. Both of them frozen in the wreckage of a moment that was supposed to bring them together, but had instead torn something else apart. Lily pulled back to look at his face, her joy already dimming as she processed Emma's reaction. Does Emma hate me now? Marcus cupped her face in his hands, seeing his own features reflected in hers, the nose, the jawline, the stubborn set of her mouth when she was trying not to cry. No, baby. She doesn't hate you. She's just scared and hurt and doesn't understand yet. Can I call you that, Dad? The question broke him. Marcus pulled her close again, his voice rough. You can call me whatever feels right. Dad Marcus, whatever you want. She wrapped her arms around him tighter. I want to call you Dad. They stayed like that while Victoria's voice filtered down from upstairs, murmuring soothing words punctuated by Emma's angry responses, too muffled to make out. Marcus held his daughter, one of his daughters, and felt the impossible weight of trying to be enough for both of them. When Victoria finally came back down, her face told him everything. She shook her head slightly. She's not ready to come down. She's angry, Marcus. Really angry. Lily looked between them, her earlier joy completely extinguished. Maybe we should go. I don't want to make Emma more upset. The mature way she said it, the careful consideration for someone else's feelings, reminded Marcus painfully of how isolated she must have been her whole life. Always reading the room, always adjusting herself to fit into spaces that weren't quite meant for her. No, this is hard, but it's real. We don't run away from hard things. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. Maybe they'd rushed this. Maybe they should have prepared the girls better, given them more time to process before forcing them together. The rest of the afternoon was excruciating. Lily stayed close to Marcus, afraid to move too far, asking quiet questions about his work in the treehouse and his life. Emma remained upstairs, refusing to come down even when Marcus went up to try talking to her. She wouldn't open her door. Through the wood, he could hear her crying, and it tore him apart knowing he'd caused this pain. He pressed his palm flat against the door. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I was scared and I handled it wrong. You promised. After Mom died, you promised we'd always be honest with each other. The accusation landed like a physical blow because she was right. He had made that promise during those terrible weeks after Sarah's funeral, when Emma had nightmares about him disappearing too. He'd sworn he'd always tell her the truth, always be there, always choose her first. You're right. I broke that promise, and I'm sorry. Silence then quietly. Are you going to love her more than me? Marcus's heart cracked open. He pressed his forehead against the door, wishing he could pull Emma into his arms. Never. Impossible. You're my Emma. Having another daughter doesn't make me love you less. It just means my heart has to grow bigger. That's what you said before. But now she's here and you smile at her the way you used to smile at Mom. The observation was devastating in its accuracy. He had been falling for Lily, drawn to her quick mind and her hunger to learn, her determination to master whatever she attempted. It didn't replace his love for Emma, but Emma couldn't see that distinction yet. Can I come in? Please. After a long pause, the lock clicked. Marcus opened the door to find Emma on her bed, face red and splotchy, clutching the stuffed elephant from her mother. She wouldn't look at him and yet look at him. He sat on the edge of the bed, not touching, giving her space to be angry. Lily needs me because she never had a dad. I get that. But I need you too. I know you do, baby. And you'll always have me. But it feels like I'm losing you. Marcus chose his next words carefully, knowing they'd shape how Emma understood this for years to come. When your mom died, it was just us against the world. You and me. And that felt safe, right? Just the two of us. Nobody else to worry about. Emma nodded against her elephant. But safe isn't the same as good. Your mom wouldn't want us to close ourselves off from other people just because loving them is scary. She wants us to be brave enough to let our family grow, even if it's messy and complicated. Emma finally looked at him, her green eyes swimming. But Lily gets you all the time now, and you get me every other day, every morning and every night, every school pickup and every bedtime story. Sharing me doesn't mean losing me. Promise, promise. You're stuck with me, kiddo. Forever. She let him pull her into a hug, but Marcus felt the tension in her shoulders, the way she didn't quite relax against him the way she used to. Trust had been damaged. It would take more than promises to repair it. When they finally came back downstairs, Victoria and Lily were sitting on the couch in careful silence. Lily's eyes were red from crying, and she looked up when Emma appeared with such hope on her face that Marcus felt his chest tighten. Emma stayed close to Marcus, watching Lily with guarded eyes. The easy friendliness from earlier had evaporated, replaced by careful distance. Lily stood up slowly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to mess up your family." Her voice was small and formal, retreating back into the polished politeness that was probably her default when she felt unsafe. Emma looked at her, then at Marcus, then back to Lily. "It's not your fault." The words came out grudging, but they came. It was something. Marcus would take something over nothing any day. Victoria suggested they should go, giving everyone space to process. Lily hugged Marcus goodbye with desperate intensity, making him promise 3 times that this was real, that he wasn't going to disappear now that she knew the truth. After they left, Marcus and Emma sat in silence. She leaned against him on the couch, and he wrapped his arm around her, and neither of them spoke because there were no words that could make this easier. That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about how to fix this. Emma deserved time to adjust. Lily deserved a father who'd been missing for 9 years. He was one person trying to be enough for 2 daughters who both needed all of him. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Lily cried herself to sleep, asking if Emma will ever like her. He texted back, "Emma will come around. She just needs time." But he didn't know if that was true. He was hoping the way you hope when there's nothing else left to do. The next few days were careful and painful. Emma was quiet around him, not angry exactly, but distant in a way that hurt worse than anger would have. She asked permission before doing things she used to do automatically, like she wasn't sure she was still allowed to be herself. Marcus called Victoria Wednesday evening. "We need help with this. Professional help." She'd already been thinking the same thing. She had the name of a child psychologist who specialized in family transitions. They made an appointment for the following week, all 4 of them together. In the meantime, Victoria asked if Lily could visit the workshop Saturday. Just for an hour, nothing formal. Marcus agreed, hoping that maybe neutral territory would help. When Mrs. Brennan brought Lily that weekend, the older woman's stern expression softened fractionally when she saw Marcus. "Take care of her. She's been talking about nothing else all week." Lily was shy at first, staying close to the door, like she might need to run. But when Marcus showed her what he was working on a bookshelf for a client with complicated joinery, her natural curiosity won out. "What kind of wood is that red oak? Strong, takes stain well, relatively easy to work with." She moved closer, studying the joints with the intensity she apparently brought to everything. "Can I help?" Marcus handed her sandpaper, showing her how to work with the grain. She approached it with the same precise focus she probably used on her violin, careful and deliberate. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lily spoke, not looking up from her sanding. "Emma doesn't want me here, does she?" Marcus set down his tools. "It's not that simple. Emma's scared. She lost her mom 2 years ago, and now she's finding out she has to share her dad. That's a lot for an 8-year-old. Do you wish you didn't know about me? Would it be easier if we'd never met?" The question gutted him. Marcus knelt down so they were eye level. "Never. Not for 1 second. You're my daughter. Finding out about you is the best thing that's happened to me in 2 years. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Really, really." She threw her arms around him, and Marcus held her. This daughter he was just learning how to love, and wondered how he was going to build a family from pieces that didn't quite fit together yet. When Emma came home from her friend's house that afternoon, she found Marcus and Lily at a workbench. Her face closed off immediately. "Oh, you're here." Lily stood up, suddenly awkward. "Hi, Emma." The girls looked at each other across the workshop, and Marcus saw all the ways this could go wrong. Emma could turn around and leave. She could say something cruel. She could reject the sister she hadn't asked for. Instead, she walked to the workbench and looked at what Lily had been sanding. "You're doing it wrong. You have to go with the grain, not across it." Lily looked at the wood, then at Emma. "Can you show me?" And just like that, something shifted. Not fixed, not healed, but shifted. Emma demonstrated the proper technique with exaggerated patience, and Lily listened with genuine interest. And for 5 minutes, they were just two girls learning about woodworking instead of sisters figuring out how to be sisters. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Thursday afternoon found all four of them crammed into Dr. Chen's office, a space designed to be soothing with soft colors and comfortable chairs that felt anything but comfortable under these circumstances. Dr. Chen was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, the kind of therapist who saw through carefully constructed facades within minutes. She spent the first 10 minutes just observing them, watching how they arranged themselves in chairs, who looked at whom where the invisible battle lines were drawn. Emma sat as far from Lily as possible while still being in the same room. Lily kept her hands folded in her lap, that careful posture Marcus now recognized as her armor against rejection. Victoria perched on the edge of her seat like she might need to flee. Marcus felt caught between all of them, inadequate to the task of holding this fragile constellation together. Emma, can you tell me how you felt when you found out Lily was your sister? Emma picked at the arm of her chair, avoiding everyone's eyes. Confused, mad, scared. Darchen leaned forward slightly. Scared of what? That dad would like her better because she's new and interesting and I'm just regular. Lily made a small, wounded sound. Dr. Chen held up a hand before anyone could speak. Lily, what did you feel when you found out Marcus was your father? Happy. Really, really happy. Like I'd been missing something my whole life, and suddenly it was there. And now, how do you feel now? Lily's voice dropped to barely audible. Scared that I made Emma's life worse. Scared that wanting a dad makes me selfish. Scared that any minute someone's going to realize I don't belong and make me leave. Dr. Chen looked at the adults. You see the problem? Two children both terrified they were not wanted, both competing for proof that they matter. As long as they see each other as threats instead of allies, this won't work. She turned back to the girls. Emma, what do you know about Lily's life before she met your dad? Emma shrugged, defensive. She's rich, lives in a mansion, gets to do fancy stuff like violin lessons. Lily, tell Emma what it was actually like. Lily's face scrunched like she might cry. Lonely. I didn't have friends because other kids thought I was weird. I ate dinner by myself most nights because mother was working. I had everything money could buy, but nobody to play with or talk to who wasn't getting paid to be there. Emma looked genuinely surprised, her anger wavering. Dr. Chen pressed the advantage. Emma, what was your life like after your mom died? Sad. Really sad. But Dad was there every morning making breakfast, every night reading stories. He taught me how to fix things and build things, and we had each other. Lily, what do you think about that? I wish I had that. Someone to teach me normal stuff. Someone who was just there. Dr. Chen let the silence stretch, letting them sit with the revelation that they both had what the other desperately wanted and lacked. You're not enemies. You're not even really competing. You're two girls who've both lost something and found each other in the middle of that loss. Emma lost her mother. Lily never had a father. But now you have a chance to help each other instead of making each other's pain worse. Emma's defenses were cracking, her face softening as she looked at Lily with new understanding. I didn't know you were lonely. You always seem perfect. I'm not. I'm scared all the time of messing up, of people leaving, of not being good enough. Me too. Ever since Mom died. Dr. Chen smiled for the first time. So maybe instead of fighting over your dad, you could have each other. Sisters who understand what it's like to be scared while trying to be brave. The shift wasn't instant. Years of therapy had taught Chen not to expect miracles. But something loosened in the room, some of the defensive tension bleeding out, as both girls considered the possibility that they didn't have to be adversaries. On the way home, Emma was quiet in the back seat. Finally, she spoke, her voice small but determined. Can Lily come over this weekend? For real, not just because we have to. Marcus met her eyes in the rearview mirror, hope blooming in his chest. Yeah, kiddo, I'll ask her mom. That Friday night, both girls slept over at Marcus's house. Victoria had been skeptical about the idea, but Dr. Chen encouraged it, controlled exposure to build trust and normalcy. Marcus set them up in Emma's room with sleeping bags and more pillows than necessary snacks, within reach flashlights for shadow puppets. They were tentative with each other, at first polite in a way that felt fragile. But then Emma pulled out her collection of favorite books and started reading one aloud. Lily curled up beside her to see the pictures, and something shifted. The formality dissolved into genuine interest, questions about characters, becoming questions about each other. By midnight, they were giggling over some private joke Marcus couldn't follow from downstairs, where he and Victoria sat with coffee, listening to the sound of their daughters becoming sisters. This is working. Victoria's voice carried disbelief and relief in equal measure. It's a start. I'm moving the foundation offices here, opening a branch in town. Marcus looked at her, surprised. You're leaving New York. Lily needs her father close. I need to be where Lily is. The foundation can operate from anywhere. Turns out I don't need Manhattan to prove I'm more than my trust fund. She turned to look at him in the dim kitchen light. I spent 9 years building walls and protecting money and trying to control everything. Time to try something different. The nightmare hit around 3 in the morning. Lily's screams woke the entire house high and terrified and completely inconsolable. By the time Marcus got upstairs, she was thrashing in her sleeping bag, caught in some dream he couldn't reach. Emma was awake and crying, scared by Lily's panic, but not sure what to do. Marcus knelt beside Lily, calling her name, until she surfaced enough to recognize him. Even then, it took 15 minutes of breathing exercises and constant reassurance before she could speak. I dreamed you forgot about me, that I came to visit and you didn't remember who I was. Her voice was small and broken. 9 years of abandonment, fears condensing into one terrible image. That's not going to happen. I promise. I'm not going anywhere, Lily. I'm your dad. That doesn't change. Emma watched from her bed, seeing Lily's terror with new eyes. When Lily finally calmed enough to stop shaking, Emma climbed down and crawled into the sleeping bag next to her without asking permission. I get bad dreams too, about my mom disappearing and my dad forgetting to come home. But Dad's always there when I wake up. He'll be there for you too. Lily turned to look at Emma, both girls' faces tear-stained and exhausted. You promise, yeah. And if you have bad dreams, I'll wake you up. That's what sisters do. The word sisters hung between them, tentative and new. Lily reached for Emma's hand, and Emma let her take it, and they fell asleep like that, tangled together, holding on. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching them breathe in sync, feeling Victoria appear beside him. She was crying silently, and he understood. This was what they'd been fighting for, what all the pain and mistakes had been leading toward these two girls who needed each other, learning how to be what the other needed. The peace lasted exactly 5 days before Victoria's uncle complicated everything. Marcus got served papers at his workshop on a Tuesday afternoon, legal documents filed by James Ashford seeking guardianship review. The language was dense and threatening, citing concerns about Marcus's suitability as a parent given his working-class background and lack of resources to maintain Lily's standard of living. Dave found him sitting on the workshop floor, papers scattered around him, too angry to speak. What's that rich people trying to take my daughter away because I'm not rich enough to deserve her? Dave picked up one of the documents, squinting at the legal language. You going to fight? Marcus looked at his employee friend's surrogate uncle, who'd known him since he was Emma's age. With what, I can barely afford a decent lawyer, let alone the kind Victoria's family probably has on retainer. So you roll over. Let them win because they have deeper pockets. Marcus thought about Lily's face when she called him dad for the first time, about Emma's slow warming toward her sister, about the family they were trying to build from wreckage. No, I fight. Victoria called that night, furious in a way he'd never heard. I didn't authorize this. My uncle went behind my back, using old family clauses I didn't even know existed. I'm fighting it, Marcus. My lawyers are already drafting responses. Maybe he's right. Maybe Lily deserves better than a workshop and a 2-bedroom house. Victoria's voice went sharp. Don't you dare. Don't let him make you doubt yourself. Lily doesn't need a bigger house. She needs you. She needs someone who teaches her to build things and doesn't care if she gets dirty. Someone who bandages her scrapes and lets her fail without judgment. Money can't buy that, her voice softened. I chose wrong 10 years ago. I chose protecting money over protecting love. I'm not making that mistake again. The legal battle stretched over 6 weeks of depositions, character witnesses, home inspections that made Marcus acutely aware of every scuff mark and outdated appliance. James Ashford's lawyers painted him as well-meaning but inadequate, someone who couldn't provide the educational opportunities and social connections Lily would need to manage her eventual inheritance. Marcus's lawyer, a fierce woman named Patricia Chen, who worked pro bono after hearing his story, built a different case. Testimony from Emma's teachers about Marcus's involved parenting. Dr. Chen's professional opinion that Lily's relationship with Marcus was therapeutic and necessary for her mental health. Character witnesses from neighbors' clients. Father Tony from the church who'd known Marcus since childhood. And Victoria, who spent 3 hours on the stand explaining her choices, defending Marcus's character, and making it crystal clear that she wanted him fully involved in Lily's life, regardless of what her uncle thought about working-class fathers. The judge ruled in Marcus's favor with one condition: DNA testing, to legally establish paternity before formal custody arrangements could be finalized. The results came back days later, 0.97% probability. The number was meaningless. Marcus had known the truth the second he saw Lily pointing at his tattoo, but it made everything legal and indisputable. Formal custody agreements were drafted. Joint legal custody, with Lily spending 40% of her time with Marcus, 60% with Victoria, due to school district considerations. Marcus's name was added to Lily's birth certificate 9 years late. She became Lily Ashford Donovan, hyphenated proof that two families could become one through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. Thanksgiving marked their first holiday as an official, if unconventional, family. Marcus hosted because Victoria's mansion felt too formal, too much like obligation instead of celebration. He'd been up since 5 preparing Sarah's traditional menu, turkey stuffing, green bean casserole, mashed potatoes from scratch. Emma and Lily took over decorating with more enthusiasm than skill, resulting in construction paper centerpieces that defied both logic and gravity. Marcus didn't care that it looked like an elementary school craft project. His daughters had made it together, arguing over tape and giggling over inside jokes. Victoria arrived at noon with Mrs. Brennan, who'd refused to retire before seeing this situation through. The older woman surveyed the kitchen chaos with her usual stern expression, but Marcus caught her smiling when Emma showed her the calligraphed place cards Lily had made. They sat around Marcus's battered kitchen table, 6 people who shouldn't fit together but did anyway. Before eating, Emma insisted on Sarah's tradition, everyone saying one thing they were grateful for. "I'm grateful for my sister, even though she's annoying sometimes." Lily threw a wadded napkin at her, grinning. "I'm grateful for my dad and for Emma teaching me that families can be loud and messy and good." Victoria's voice was thick. "I'm grateful for second chances, for people who forgive mistakes they had every right to hold against me." Mrs. Brennan surprised at everyone. "I'm grateful these children finally have what they needed. And for Mr. Donovan, who turned out to be exactly the man I hoped he was." Marcus met the older woman's eyes, seeing approval there that meant more than he'd expected. "I'm grateful for all of you, for family that finds each other even when the odds are impossible." The meal was chaotic and perfect. December brought Christmas preparations and the revelation that Lily had never decorated a real tree. Victoria's decorator handled their mansion displays annually, resulting in magazine-perfect arrangements that looked beautiful and felt sterile. Emma was scandalized. They spent a Saturday at a tree lot picking out a Douglas fir that shed needles everywhere and refused to stand straight. Marcus spent an hour adjusting it while the girls directed from the couch, Victoria documenting the entire ridiculous process on her phone. Decorating was warfare disguised as holiday cheer. Emma had strong opinions about ornament placement. Lily wanted everything symmetrical and color coordinated. They argued about tinsel, about whether bubble lights were tacky or classic, about the proper angel-to-star ratio for tree toppers. The finished tree looked like chaos incarnate, ornaments clustered randomly, tinsel applied with more enthusiasm than skill lights, blinking seizure-inducing patterns. It was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen because his daughters had made it together. Christmas morning, Emma woke Lily at 6 by jumping on the guest bed. Victoria arrived at 7 with more presents than 2 kids could possibly need. They opened gifts in Marcus's living room, wrapping paper carnage spreading across every surface. Lily gave Emma a friendship bracelet she'd made in secret, each bead carefully chosen. Emma gave Lily a carved wooden box Marcus had helped her make a phoenix burned into the lid. "For your treasures. Dad showed me how to do the design. It's like our tattoos, sort of." Lily traced the phoenix with one finger, tears streaming. "It's perfect. I love it." The treehouse reached completion in early January during an unseasonably warm weekend. Marcus had been working on it for 8 months, but the final touches, railings, roof pulley system, were done with both girls helping every step. They carved their initials into the main support beam. MDEDLAD. Marcus added the date and the words Donovan Daughters. Both girls insisted Victoria add her initials too, so VA joined the others in permanent ink. The christening ceremony involved hot chocolate and thermoses, and a sign Emma and Lily had painted Castle Donovan Sisters Only Dad Allowed Sometimes. They hung it above the entrance and declared the structure officially open. That night, despite January cold, both girls insisted on sleeping in the treehouse. Marcus set them up with heated sleeping bags and walkie-talkies linked to the house. He and Victoria sat on the back porch with coffee and blankets, watching lights glow in the treehouse windows. "We did something right." Victoria's voice carried wonder. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the journey that had brought them here. Finally, in the treehouse above them, Emma and Lily talked in the darkness, their voices carrying on cold air through the open walkie-talkie. "Do you think about how weird this is? That we didn't know each other 6 months ago, and now we're sisters sometimes? But good weird, like finding something you didn't know you lost." "That's deep, Lily. I've been practicing deep. Thanks for not hating me. When you found out, you could have made this really hard." "I did make it hard for like 2 weeks. I was a total brat about it. But you stopped. You gave me a chance." Silence, then Emma's voice smaller. "I was scared Dad would forget about me, that you'd be better than me at everything and he wouldn't need me anymore. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're Emma. You're the one who knows all his stories and makes him laugh. I'm just catching up." More silence, then rustling as they shifted in sleeping bags. "Lily, yeah, I'm glad you're my sister." "Me too." Marcus and Victoria heard it all through the walkie-talkie. Victoria wiped her eyes, not bothering to hide tears. "They did it. We just stopped screwing up long enough to let them." A year later, Marcus stood in the same Patterson hardware aisle where everything had changed, both daughters with him buying supplies for the garden shed they decided to build next. Emma and Lily walked ahead, arguing about whether they needed more nails or if Dad's estimate was accurate. A woman passed with a small child, doing a double take at the identical mannerisms, the way both girls tilted their heads when arguing, the stubborn set of their jaws, hand gestures that were pure Marcus. "Are they twins?" Emma and Lily looked at each other and burst out laughing. "No, we're just sisters. We have the same dad but different moms. It's complicated but good complicated." Marcus joined his daughters, putting a hand on each shoulder, and felt the weight of the year they'd survived together. The fights and tears, the legal battles and therapy sessions, the slow, painful work of becoming a family. It hadn't been easy, but standing here now, watching his daughters bicker over construction supplies, with the comfortable familiarity of siblings who'd forgotten they hadn't always known each other, Marcus understood what Sarah had meant when she'd said love makes hard things possible, not easy. They'd done the hard thing, and somehow, impossibly, they'd made it through to the other side.